So to answer the question, can the global compact on migration strengthen the international protection regime? I'm a little bit confused, and I'm a little bit in two minds, because I have almost the same number of reasons to say yes than to say no. So let's start with the yes, and to what extent the global compact on migration, normally abbreviated GCM, has contributed to strengthening the international protection regime. I mean, you just need to read the GCM. I mean, I'm among people in civil society to believe that it remains a very good and principled text, in spite of some of the weaknesses, which were the logical results of compromises. But still, we are on the positive side with this document. And it brings a number of protection responses. For example, Objective 5 discuss or encourages government to provide admission and stay for people fleeing for climate-related reasons. Objective 7, the entire objective addresses people with vulnerabilities, and including possible access to regular status for vulnerable migrants. Objective 10 has very positive language about survivors of trafficking. I think, Catherine, you mentioned that the whole objective on detention is a good attempt to really promote alternatives to detention and to basically using detention as a last resort. And that text can benefit both migrants and refugees. Objective 21, return, the whole due process before return, as well as including, without using the expression, but including the principle of non-refoulement or the non-returnability of certain categories of migrants. So all of that is a direct or an indirect contribution to international protection. On the, let's say, more negative side, and sorry to use the word negative, but if it doesn't contribute to protection, then it's not really positive. I would say a few things. The first one is that I personally believe that the international community reached, sorry to use the expression, a kind of protection climax with the New York Declaration. The New York Declaration really attempted to build bridges and to, Catherine, to go towards what you said, the real need to increase the concept and the understanding of what is international protection, and to avoid the gap which has been part of the history, where you have on one side refugees and those associated with refugees, and on the other side, all the others, including migrants, including vulnerable migrants, including people displaced for climate-related reasons. That's the, let's say, the old thinking. And I'm afraid that to some extent, the GCM has indirectly and involuntarily contributed to this, maintaining this gap. And I will explain why. The very fact that during the year 2016, before the adoption of the New York Declaration, there were already tensions between refugee protection and migrants, and where we saw all the progress made in the discussion around refugees, including the adoption already in 2016 of the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, while we got stuck with migration, up to the point that the decision was to have two parallel tracks, basically discussion, negotiation around a global compact on refugees and a global compact for migration. So to some extent, already towards the end of the discussion around the New York Declaration, we saw a number of governments basically saying, let's keep those two things separate. We don't want to go into a discussion where international protection would be expanded and would include migrants, including vulnerable migrants. And if we look at the way the compacts were negotiated, they were negotiated completely separately. They were negotiated in a different way, with two governments taking the lead for the Global Compact on migration and UNHCR organizing a very UNHCR event around the Global Compact on refugees. And we saw during the discussion some indication that a number of governments would fight hard to maintain the distinction. It included that the first attempt to have, for example, people impacted by climate and forced to flee, they were moved from the Global Compact on refugees to the GCM. The language is quite good, and I would say most of the experts on climate would agree that the text we have managed to obtain in the GCM is very positive, and really we will be able to continue the discussion around improving the status for people being affected by for climate-related reasons. But the very fact that it is in the GCM and any attempt to build bridges was defeated. I would say this is a bit of a general consideration to see the very fact, for example, that you have the language of non-refoulement, but a number of governments refusing to use the expression. I remember a strong reaction from Russia and China during the negotiations, and saying that over our dead body, we would never accept that kind of language in the GCA. So great that you have human rights language, but that unfortunately, it falls short of building. This is the central message that unfortunately we missed an opportunity to build bridges, and in spite of all the positive language in the GCM, we will still need to build those bridges. So it's work in progress. Thank you.
I think it's very clear that migration is a phenomenon that will continue to present opportunities and challenges for the whole international community, for all countries. That has once again become very clear in the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has, in general, accelerated developments in many fields, and it brought pre-existing problems to the fore, and it makes concerted action more important than ever. This is also true if we look at the effects of the pandemic on migration. The freeze on mobility directly affected many migrants, their states and communities of origin, as well as the communities of destination. And while the pandemic has brought very negative consequences, both for individuals and for communities, it has kind of as a side effect also highlighted the crucial contributions of migrants to many sectors of the economy, and to society. So COVID-19 was maybe the most recent example, amplifying the need for coordinated migration governance. It serves as a strong reminder that migration cannot be dealt with by any country alone, but that it needs to be managed multilaterally. And this is exactly the reason why Germany has promoted the GCM from the very beginning, both at home and also in the international sphere, and why we intend and in fact look forward to continuing to do so. You have already mentioned, Jürgen, that Germany supports the GCM's vision and its principles. We have a strong interest in seeing the GCM succeed. We consider the pact a crucial milestone on our way towards more effective international cooperation with regard to migration governance specifically, and also with regard to strengthening multilateralism more generally. So the pact and the related processes epitomize our commitment to finding solutions together. To make it work, we ideally need the whole international community to actively work on the implementation of the GCM's objectives, and within the individual countries, a whole of government and a whole of society approach is required for the pact to be successful or to be effective, which Catherine, I find a very pertinent criteria to apply here. Ladies and gentlemen, the federal government has identified a number of priority policy areas among the many GCM's objectives that we currently pay particular attention to and put particular emphasis on. They include integration, access to the German labor market, preventing and countering of violent extremism, and tackling the causes of irregular migration. These priorities are underpinned by a number of domestic legislative initiatives that were launched, as well as bodies that were created in the past 3 years. Let me just mention a couple of them briefly. You might be aware of their existence. We initiated a national action plan for integration that developed more than 100 initiatives. An expert commission on the framework conditions for integration was created. There was a commission created on the root causes of displacement, also an expert body advising the federal government. The Skilled Workers Immigration Act was passed, which expands the possibilities for qualified professionals from non-EU member states to access the German labor market. And lastly, there is a cabinet committee to combat right-wing extremism and racism that developed a variety of measures to more effectively combat these phenomena. Maybe let me add a particularly important point from a foreign policy perspective. Germany continues to play an active role in international GCM implementation. We are engaged in the Migration Multi-Partner Trust Fund, both as a member of the steering committee and as its currently largest donor, with resources from several ministries adding up to currently about $8 million. We believe that supporting UN member states in building capacities for migration governance is an important element of strengthening the GCM. Another important element is the regional review process, which kept us quite busy. So I'm a bit disappointed that Catherine has never heard of it. That it took place, the regional review took place in the European region last year. The government submitted a report, civil society submitted a quite substantial shadow report, which is very informative for us as the federal government as well. We expect to also be actively engaged in the global review that will take place in 2022. We haven't worked out the details yet, but I expect the exchange with civil society and parliament to be part of the exercise, and I would like to encourage civil society actors to contribute some of their indeed overstretched resources to this exercise. So why do we actively engage in these review processes? Also from a perspective of effectiveness, because we do this because we are convinced that these reviews are helpful for stock taking. They give member states the opportunity to reflect on where they stand on the implementation. Secondly, they provide an opportunity to examine and possibly readjust policies as external factors evolve. I mentioned COVID-19 as one of these factors. that makes an examination quite useful. And furthermore, the reviews raise awareness and knowledge of the GCM and its goals, because they expose people in a variety of functions, be it in government, be it in civil society, to the GCM and its goals, and give them the opportunity to understand the standards spelled out in the pact better and exchange on best practices with other countries. So in sum, we believe that review processes can contribute to strengthening the normative power of the GCM, and that's why we will continue to take part in these exercises. Let me just mention a very welcome development with regard to the normative effect of the GCM, and that is the changed stance of the US, who, as we all know, voted against the adoption of the pacts, both pacts, in 2018. It recently referenced the GCM as a framework during a dialogue on human rights of migrants that was in June 21, and we very much welcome this change in US policy. Let me finish with a quick remark on terminology, because that has come up in both previous presentations. We follow as a government, we follow the definition of the UNHCR and treat migrants and refugees as two distinctive categories. This clearly comes from a practitioner's perspective. We as a government are called upon and required even to implement existing norms, and we have the Geneva Refugee Convention, which affords special protection to refugees, and that's why we don't see refugees included in the term migrants, but treat these two groups as distinct. I say this with full respect for the merits of a different categorization, be it for the purposes of analysis, be it for the purposes of discussing how protection can be improved. But as practitioners, we stick to the definition that the UNHCR employs on these two different and distinct categories. So let me just finish by saying that we, of course, support the Global Compact for Refugees as well, and believe that the core principle of the GCR, the burden and responsibility sharing, is needed more than ever, particularly as we approach the 70th anniversary of the Geneva Refugee Convention, and we looking at crises such as the ones in Afghanistan and Ethiopia, as well as other global challenges. We need international cooperation and solidarity, and Germany will continue to encourage other member states of the international community to take on its share of responsibility for the protection of refugees. Thank you very much.